Hello my friends and welcome to the Battle of Kasaham. This is when US forces annihilated Russian mercenaries in Syria, and stay to the end to see why these Russian mercenaries disappeared faster than a toupee during a hurricane. A lot of this information I got from the Coffee or Die magazine, so check them out. I'll link to that in the description below. This story is going to involve F-15Es, B-52s, Apache attack helicopters, US Special Forces, and a lot more. It's going to be a good one. Let's dive in. Everything started February 7th, 2018, when the Kremlin-linked Wagner group started to amass near the Euphrates River. Now, this group combined forces from Bashar al-Assad's regime and Russian Wagner group forces. A lot of those Wagner group forces are actually from prisons and they are mercenaries. US Special Operations essentially watched what was happening via drone feed in disbelief, because there was communication between the Russians and the Americans, so they wouldn't get into a conflict directly with each other. But they started to see this group amass across the Euphrates River, and there was over 200 forces that were seemingly set up to attack a small outpost that contained 30 US special operators. And then the force began to grow. So from 200, it went to 500 plus 27 vehicles, which included T-72 Russian-made tanks. Meanwhile, at the Air Operations Center, where the big brass hangs out, where the big brains are, where the big decisions are supposedly made, they realized that this force of Wagner mercenaries were getting ready to attack that outpost, where 30 US Army Rangers and Delta Force commandos were doing commando things. The commandos were working alongside Kurdish and Arab forces, and they prepared to defend themselves with all means available. And this includes, you guessed it, aircraft, including the mighty AC-130, among many other heavy hitters. And then backup prepares to go in and knock some skulls. A quick reaction force was set up and sent to the location. This reaction force was about 20 miles away, so they slowly start to make their way there because they drove in a blacked out fashion with no lights on through roads that were in disrepair. So they slowly start to make their way there with extra ammunition and food and water. And this quick reaction force is relatively small. It's only 16 US commandos and other allied Syrian forces that are making their way there. But as you can imagine, this small force is gonna pack a big punch. At 8:30 p.m., the situation goes from awkward to serious as 3 Russian tanks move in closer, and it became clear that the attack was imminent. The quick reaction force was getting there as fast as they could. And then at 10:30 p.m., the situation crosses the point of no return when a column of Russian and Syrian vehicles opened fire on the tiny outpost. Tanks, artillery fire, and mortar fire began to rain down on the Americans as they ran for defensive positions, and they began to return fire with machine guns and anti-tank weapons. And then enter Secretary of Defense Jim Mad Dog Mattis. He picks up the phone and calls his Russian counterpart. That's the Russian High Command in Syria. The Russian High Commander was also taking part in a gymnastics event where he was a part-time judge, supposedly. He tells Jim Mad Dog Mattis that these forces that are attacking Americans have nothing to do with Russia. So Jim Mad Dog Mattis, being the mad dog that he is, says, copy that. The Secretary of Defense then directs the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to annihilate the force, which they essentially thought was the Wagner group. But hey, Russia said, we don't know what's going on over there. So here we go. So after Mad Dog Mattis makes that call, expert direction comes from Air Force combat controllers, and they call in waves of fire support. This includes air cover from F-22s, F-15Es dropping bombs, H-64 Apache attack helicopters, you got it, the AC-130 gunship, B-52 bombers, and MQ-9 Reapers. The quick reaction force actually was even more delayed now due to driving completely blacked out. And then you guessed it, these air assets begin to cut through these Russian Wagner forces like a knife through butter. From a Russian survivor that was involved in the Wagner group, they said, we should never have been there. Our leadership messed up. The Americans knew exactly where we were. That was from that former Russian mercenary and survivor from the event that night. Finally, the quick reaction force of 16 commandos arrives at the outpost. They bring much needed ammunition to those inside the outpost that are returning fire for the ambush. The quick reaction force discovered 200 to 300 dead Russian fighters from the Wagner group. One Syrian inside the American outpost was injured. That's it. And of course, Russia is going to downplay the incident. In an official release, they're going to say that only 5 members of Russian contractors were killed during the event. But another quote from a survivor says, to make it short, we got destroyed. One Wagner Group veteran reportedly said in a recording, yeah, so one squadron lost 200 people immediately, another one lost 10 people, and I don't know about the third squadron, but it got torn up pretty badly. They tore us to pieces. So why did it all happen so fast? In an instant, in the flick of a switch. Enter the AC-130 gunship. The AC-130 got the call and they arrived on station and began to lay down more firepower than a Chinese New Year. Anyway, the AC-130 laid down 25mm, 40mm, and 105mm rounds, hundreds of these rounds within minutes. Essentially, the AC-130 is like playing a video game where you're constantly on God mode, and that's essentially what they did that night. They remained on God mode the entire time and annihilated the Russian mercenaries. And there were F-22s above them to protect them in case Russia got sneaky and launched any Su-30s to go in and try to take down the AC-130. And what else was on station? Well, I'm glad you asked. The mighty F-15E, lovingly called the Mud Hen, was on station with its air-to-air and air-to-ground loadout. It was able to drop bombs and protect assets like the AC-130 simultaneously. It also has a second member, a Wizzo, in the back who's able to do what's called command and control and manage the different air assets and keep everybody deconflicted as all these weapons are raining in like a monsoon. And then you've got the Apache attack helicopters. These things are essentially like little surgeons. There's a helmet-mounted gun sight, which allows them to really get to work. And then there are B-52s on station that carried more bombs than the porta potties at a Taylor Swift concert. Literally, these things are loaded out to the teeth and can handle just about any task. So all those air assets combined with the US commandos got to work. So this sent a clear message to the Russian mercenaries to never do this again. And it just so happens that 1 month later, almost in the same location along the Euphrates River, another force of 300 Russian mercenaries began to amass near an outpost close to where the first outpost was that was full of US commandos. This time, Jim Mad Dog Mattis picked up the phone to his Russian counterpart, who'd been fired from his job as a judge for the Russian Gymnastics Foundation. And he told him, hey, you're amassing your troops in the same location. If you try to attack this outpost again, you're gonna be annihilated yet again. And you guessed it, after that phone call, that group of Russian mercenaries began to disperse faster than a babysitter's boyfriend leaves the house when the parents return and the car pulls back up. At the end of the day, it's about sending that clear and direct message, and US Special Operations Forces and the US Air Force were able to make that happen. Hope you enjoyed this story, my friends. If you did, please check out another video, maybe like and subscribe, it would mean a lot. And comment below what you thought about this incident, and if you think this will ever happen again. Thanks so much for being here. Most of all, catch you on the next video.